Secretary Buttigieg joins us now. We're going to talk infrastructure, EVs, labor. I want to talk to you about 100 things.
Good.
Are you running? The marathon.
You're here in New York. The marathon is on Sunday.
What do you think I meant?
You've run marathons before, though, haven't you?
Half marathons about
half
as far
marathons.
as I go.
I thought you were a
half
runner.
Ironman this summer, which is great fun, but I'm gonna cool it for a while.
Oh, I see what you thought.
So you're headed over to Hudson Yards, and this is a bit of a celebratory moment of sorts for what you guys have been working on in terms of infrastructure. What do you think it actually economically, when people look at something like this, what is the actual implication? And what kind of true dollars, economic growth do you think comes off of a project like this?
Yeah, I mean, this is about more reliable train service in a tunnel that hundreds of thousands of people a day count on. It's more than 100 years old. And so we're undertaking what will be one of the biggest public works projects in modern U.S. history to fix it. If something went wrong, if that tunnel became unavailable, and it's needed that work for years and years and years, the economic implications are such that you would feel it at our house in Michigan. Meanwhile, of course, there are all the jobs that are created along the way. Just last night, I saw a bunch of people in the community of businesses that are excited to compete for the work that is going to be done. So for all of these big public works projects, there's really two economic stories that are back to back. There's, of course, the ultimate benefit of being able to use it, or in this case, knowing that it'll be reliable. There's also the benefit along the way of, construction, engineering, planning, and even just the accounting services, the food trucks, all the things that go into that big project.
Right. No, the reason I ask is I think we're at a very unique moment where the conversation in this country has turned about spending. Spending in this country. What are we spending our money on? We had Stan Druckenmiller on the program earlier this week. We're just talking about the amount of debt that we're taking on. We're sort of moving from crisis to crisis. We're now going to spend money on both wars in Ukraine and Israel and whatnot. And so I think that there's a big question of how we spend and how do we actually spend in a way that actually makes sense. It's not a short-term solution, meaning construction jobs are great in the moment. May not be great in the future, and how we should actually think about all of this.
Well, and what I would say is that we're talking here about the supply side, not so much in the 1980s sense of what was called supply side economics, but that the dollars need to go into building up the productive capacity of the United States. Remember, the shape of these infrastructure projects into this bill, very different from the last time you saw anything like this, which would have been different scale, but the stimulus work that was being done in 08, 09, right? Then the emphasis was just find a way to it was about demand. It was get that money into the economy however you can, which is why you always heard about shovel-ready projects. Now, shovel-ready projects, but also shovel-worthy projects because we're interested in building up the supply side of our economy.
Given your role in transportation, what do you make of the UAW deal that's just been reached now with all three automakers, and what you think it will do both on the worker side, which obviously is going to improve their lives, but also on the cost side and the inflationary side of vehicles. So the average cost of a car is going to go up by about $900.
Look, I come at this from the perspective of a son of South Bend, Indiana. Our city was home to UAW Local 5 and UAW Local 9. I saw how the middle class of my hometown was built through the fact, not just that the jobs existed, but that auto jobs were good-paying jobs. And our city, even for decades before I was born, was recovering from the aftermath of losing Studebaker in 1963. What we have on our hands right now is obviously a new chapter in the automotive industry starting with some of the new technologies that are coming on. And wanting to make sure they're made in the U.S. is a priority of ours. So is wanting to make sure that they're good jobs. Now, those good-paying jobs mean that there's also a lot of pressure on the companies to innovate in the same way that we put a lot of pressure on them to innovate with our fuel economy standards. But every single time, they figure out a way to do it, make a great product, compete.
But you have to innovate and automate. And that's that could be the issue, that it forces even a quicker move to automation, like to compete with Tesla, which is much more automated, uses far fewer employees per car. So the best laid plans could end up hollowing out the same thing you talked about in South Bend that you saw that could happen to this industry based on being non-competitive because of some of these new deals.
But what happened to South Bend wasn't that Studebaker... Right. But let's take South Bend as a case study, right? It wasn't that Studebaker became more high-tech and was using labor in different ways. It's that they couldn't keep with the times, didn't innovate enough.
The Rust Belt itself that lost... that became, all the jobs got outsourced to where it was cheaper.
Steel jobs.
Where it was cheaper. And that can happen again because now the big three is no longer competitive because of these outside.
Well, I think they're going to remain competitive. I think they'll be competing in different ways than the newer companies. It'll continue to be interesting.
They're not competitive now with EVs, are they?
Look, from one year to the next, you're going to see some of these ups and downs. But I mean, we drive a Pacifica. I never thought I was going to be a minivan person.
An EV?
And then we had kids.
One of those.
It's a plug-in, so it's a hybrid.
You want an EV, right? Or you want a Pacifica. That's the one you mentioned.
Totally want a Pacifica.
I like it.
He's got a Pacifica. Oh,
yeah, so the point
is
we plug it in, the first 30 or 40 miles runs on electric, then it switches to gas on a long road trip, right? But my point is that the U.S. auto industry, where they're talking about the newer companies that grew up around this, like a Tesla, or the big three, they're all finding ways to compete on, yes, they have to obviously make sure that they keep driving the cost down, but also they're competing on quality. We're excited about that. I think a great motivated labor force is a big part of that, too.
Can I just ask, I mean, I come from a union background, too. My grandfather was the president of the Carpenters Union in Indiana, but let me just take a look at one of the things they agreed to today that kind of shocked me. The big three is going to be paying the strikers a daily wage for all the days that they striked. I mean, that seems like a crazy setup because you don't want it to be easy to strike. You don't want it to be. It hurts everybody.
Yeah, but
when
I don't
people
think...
are on strike. I mean, that's what the funds at the unions were for.
Yeah, they have a strike
funds.
fund. But
look, the idea of
just...
doing that, I mean, that's just like in a negotiation. You don't agree to pay the other person's attorney fees because you don't want to be back at the table. You want to force people to have to work things out before it gets to that extreme measure.
Yeah, but sometimes you do agree to pay the other person's attorney fees. I mean, those are the economic things they worked out at the table, right? And maybe it could have come in a different fashion. And, you know, I wasn't there at the table to see all the different dials that they were turning. But look, I don't think you're ever going to have a situation where workers go on strike lightly. It's just such
seems like it sets it up
for them, for their families, as well as for the companies. And I think the outcome of this is going to be a level of assurance on the quality of life that comes with these jobs. Remember, this isn't happening in a vacuum. A big part of what they were pushing for was just to have their income grow in a way that corresponds with the company's income and with the executives' income.